This is the third tutorial relating to the display cabinet project. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make a drawer using finger joints. Now, just a reminder, this is my example and it has me making a single drawer down here at the bottom. Now, you don't have to do just one drawer and it doesn't have to be just at the bottom. It's up to you. But this is just an example of one way it can be done. Now, this drawer is going to have finger joints at the front and it's going to have a rebate joint at the rear. We'll get in close and I'm just going to change my view a little bit using keyboard shortcut O, just so I've got a fairly good front-on view down the bottom here. Now, if you remember from the last tutorial, I talked about the fact that I was going to make my drawer 56 millimeters deep this way. And so what I did to give myself a little bit of wiggle room, I actually added 2 millimeters between this surface here and this surface here. So if I check that with my tape measure, they should be 58 millimeters apart, which they are. To help us construct our drawer, I'm going to put in some guides. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a guide in 1 millimeter off each of these surfaces here, just again, so I've got some wiggle room. So the first one is, I want to be on this edge here and I'm going to come down. So I want to make sure that that line is blue and I'm just going to type 1 and then press enter. From the side here, I'm going to come across and make sure that line is red. Just type 1 and press enter. Same from this side. Make sure the line is red, type 1, press enter. This time I've got to make sure the line is blue, 1, press enter. Now, the other thing too, if you can remember correctly from before or from the working drawing, the distance between the back edge and the front edge is 190 millimeters. So we need to remember that number. And in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my drawer 185 millimeters deep. So it's probably good to write that number down. And you'll see why towards the end of this tutorial. Okay, so we've got that organized. Now, because there's a lot of cabinet here and it could really start to get in the way of what I'm trying to do here. So really what I want to do is hide the cabinet. So I'm going to do a marquee selection from the top left to bottom right. Make sure I've got everything there selected and then I'm going to hide it. So that's just simply a matter of selecting it, right clicking, hide. So there you go, everything is gone bar these outlines here for the front of my drawer. Now R for rectangle, and I'm going to come in close here and I'm going to select that intersection there, go down to this intersection here. Now I have the front of my drawer. P for push, actually O for orbit, so we've got a bit of a slightly different view. P for push. And the timber that we're going to make our drawer out of is generally going to be 12 millimeters thick. Certainly for the sides and back, we're going to use 12 millimeter radiata pine. The front can be a bit thicker if you want, but for simplicity's sake, I'm going to make this 12 millimeters. So I want to push back this way, just type 12, press enter. Okay, now I don't need these guides now, so I'm just going to go delete guides. They're gone. O for orbit, so I get back to a fairly nice front view. Now the finger cutter that I'm going to use, I mentioned in the last tutorial, has a diameter of 8 millimeters. So I need to incorporate that into my design here. And if you remember, that's why this is 56 millimeters deep, because I wanted it to be an odd multiple of 8. Okay, T for tape measure, find the bottom edge. We come up, make sure that line is blue, type 8, enter. From that line, up, 8, enter. Make sure that line is blue, 8, enter. And the last one. I'll just come in a little bit closer over here. Now we also have to remember that the timber at the side of the drawers is 12 millimeters thick, so we need to take that into account. So make sure that that line is red, T for tape, move out across the front of the drawer, make sure that line is red and type 12, press enter. Just going to come in on this other side here and do the same. 12, enter. Okay, L for line tool. I'm going to play a little bit of join the intersections now. So we're going to find that intersection there. Left click, left click, left click. And down here, 1, 2, 3, 4. We do that again here. And then we've got this final section here. O for orbit, so I can get a little bit of a view off here. P for push, and we're going to push these sections out. We're going to come around. O for orbit, we're going to come around to this other end here. Now, we want to pan across, and there's a shortcut that I don't use often. I'm just going to go H. That's the other shortcut for the pan tool. So the one that I use most of the time, because normally I just pan as part of an orbit routine. So that'll be, I'm usually in orbit, so I can orbit around, but then I can quickly just hit the shift key while I'm in that mode and pan across. So there's two ways you can do it. So there's obviously orbit. When you're in orbit, you can use the shift, or if you're not in orbit, you can just use the letter H as a keyboard shortcut. Now, L for line, and we do the same on this side. Just got to make sure that it really does land on those intersections. Sometimes it can not. P for push, push those back. All right, so there's our front done. Now the next thing we want to do, let's just make that a component now. So we'll do our marquee selection, right click. Whoops, that didn't work because I just selected a guide. Right click. Make component, draw front. There we go. Okay, now those guides are going to get in the way, so we can just click away from that. Delete guides. There we go. Okay, now I'm going to do something a little bit odd. I'm just going to orbit around the side here. Now remember I said let's write that number down, 185, which is the depth of our draw. So T for tape, I'm going to give myself a little mark along here. I'm going to go back, make sure that line is green. I'm going to type 185, press enter. R for rectangle, and I'm going to select that guide point there, and then I'm going to go up to this corner of the draw front here. There's a rectangle. Now, again, just so that we don't get too confused, so I'm just going to orbit around just so you can see what's going on here. This actually gives us an opportunity to sort of very quickly draw in the opposite pieces here. Okay, because we basically need to have these opposite fingers in place. But this can get a little bit confusing. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can either just do it exactly the same way as I just did it for the front there, and just remember to take out the opposite pieces. And to be honest, that's probably the easiest way. The other way you can do it is come in and trace over these bits here, but sometimes there can be a little bit of a risk that you don't line everything up perfectly. So let's, just for the sake of simplicity, let's select that front component, right click, hide it, T for tape, and we'll do our guides again. So we'll go down to the bottom here, come up, got to make sure that line is blue, 8, and then in from the front here, make sure that line is green, and it's 12. All right. So, like I said before, we've just now got to make sure we take out the opposite pieces here. Now, if that gets a little bit confusing, what you can do is you can go back here and just go unhide. So unhide last, so we can see. So obviously we've got to take out this section here, this section here, this section here. So we can hide that again. and we'll come in close and we'll go alpha line. So we've got to take that one out. H for pan, just so I can move up. Alpha line again. We've got to. Now we've done this slightly differently to the front, and like I say, there's numerous ways you can do things in SketchUp. So we actually haven't pushed this out yet to give it any thickness. So this is the other way that you can do this. So we're just going to get our eraser here. We're going to erase that bit of line there, that bit of line there, that bit of line there. Then we're going to go P for push, and we're going to bring this towards us, 12 millimeters. Then I'm going to do a marquee selection again. I mean, I could do the triple click as well. Right click, make component, draw side. There we go. Now again, I don't need those guides, so I'm just going to go delete guides, get rid of those. And I'm also going to come back here and go unhide last. So we've got our, so O for orbit. We'll look around. Okay, so now we've got our draw front and our draw side. So like we've done in the past, we can duplicate this now if we wish. So I'm going to select it. Control C, Control V. It's over here. Attach a known point to a known point. So if I zoom in there, I know that corner there needs to come into, and I'll just zoom in here, needs to come into that corner there. So we've got our front and our two sides. Okay, O for orbit. I'm just going to come in and have a bit more of a top view here. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a housing joint at the back. I'm going to have a piece of timber at the back that comes across that is going to have a corresponding, I suppose you'd really call it a tenon almost, that fits into the housing. And it's going to be 12 millimeters thick. So what I'll do is I'm just going to, just for simplicity's sake, we'll edit this particular side here. So I'll come in fairly a little bit closer there. T for tape. So I'm going to come along this way. I'm going to go 12, enter. So make sure that line is green. So 12, enter. Now, if you remember correctly, the housing that we did for the panel in the side frame, the diameter of the router bit there was 6 millimeters. And we might as well just use that same router bit to do this housing here. So if we select this line here, come back towards the back 6 millimeters, and we can make it maybe 6 millimeters deep as well. That's pretty nice and easy. R for rectangle. Now, I just realized we've got a little bit of not a mistake yet, but I was about to make a mistake. I actually had selected that component, but I hadn't said or asked permission to edit it. So fortunately I stopped myself just before I made a mistake, but I'm just going to make sure I right click on it, edit component. You can see that those guides there have gone a little bit grey, and what it means is they're not actually attached to that component. But for the purposes of what we're doing here, that doesn't really matter, fortunately. So R for rectangle. So now we're actually drawing on the component, and I'm just going to orbit around so I've got a better view of what I'm about to do here. P for push, so I'm going to start there. I don't want to get, I think I've actually just accidentally moved that slightly. If I come in, yes I have. So I can undo that. That's better. Okay, P for push. We're going to go down, and it's going to be 56 millimeters. There we go. So we've got our housing. Now, I'll just go to zoom extents here. Now you can see here, we've come across this issue before where this has done it to this component because these components are linked, but it's done on the wrong side. Easily fixed. Select that component by left clicking on it, right click, flip along, and it'll be components red. There we go. Now we've got that all perfect. So we've got our housings in place there. So really all we've got left to do is just to do the back piece. And this can be done fairly easily. I'm going to just, again, get rid of those guides just so they're not in the way. So delete guides. So I'm going to do it this way. R for rectangle. And I'm going to go from there to there. Then I'm going to P for push. And I'm going to go this way. Now I know that's 56 millimeters, so I can just even type 56, press enter. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide this component here. So I'll just select it, right click, hide it. O for orbit, I'm just going to come around here, L for line. Now I know that that's 6, this is 12 millimeters wide and that's got to be 6 millimeters. Now this is automatically going to find the midpoint. That's just a lucky little thing that I've got with the dimensioning that I've got. Otherwise I just have to do a guide that came in 6 millimeters from there. But I'm going to go midpoint, L, go down so long as that's blue, P for push, and I'm going to bring this out 6. And up here I'm going to hide that as well. O for orbit, I'm just going to come back around the other side here. Make sure I can see that entire end. O for orbit, come in, L for line, find that midpoint, come down, P for push, bring this out 6. In the real world, I'd actually get you to bring it out 5 and have a little gap there, just so that you didn't sort of jam and have it bottom out in the back of the drawer. Now we'll just select away from that. We're going to go unhide all. Okay. O for orbit. Let's come around. Okay, so we've got our draw done. Now you can see here, this sits 5 millimeters out from the back. And this is flush at the front. Now I'll talk to you about this in the workshop, but I will say to you that if you look at any furniture that's ever been designed, it is very rare to have something sitting perfectly flush like a drawer at the front. Normally what happens is that it is usually set back in a few millimeters, usually about 5 millimeters. And there is a very good reason for that. And the reason is this. The chances of you making this drawer perfectly, or the chances of you making your cabinet perfectly so that your drawer can fit perfectly flush with your cabinet, is almost impossible. And I'm not being rude by saying, you're learning to do woodworking or things like that. It's basically impossible for very advanced woodworkers. So there's a trick that everyone plays. And what it is you set it back 5 millimeters from any outside face. And the thing is, if it's not perfect and it becomes 4 millimeters or it becomes 6 millimeters, or it's 5 millimeters on one side and it's 4 millimeters on the other, it's actually very hard for the human eye to detect that. Whereas if something is slightly out of flush, it might only be 0.5 millimeter out. The human eye will detect it. So that's a little trick that we play. Now what I'm going to do now, so now I've described that, I'm going to undo that hide process there. And I'm just going to orbit a little bit. And I'm just going to see if I can get that other side back. Doesn't look like it. It's a little bit of a shame because what I want to do, okay, I'm going to have to work around this a slightly different way. I'm just going to go unhide all. This is where when jobs get more complicated, you're going to have to start organizing all of the different bits of it. Okay, so I'm just going to pan down a little bit. What I want to do is I'm actually going to start to organize this into groups. So I'm going to start with this side panel here, and I'm going to do a additive selection. So you can see I've selected that component, but if I now press the shift key, you can see a little plus or minus there. So I'm now going to select that component, that component, that component, and that component. I'm going to right click and I'm going to make that into a group. Then I'm going to right click again and I'm going to hide it. Okay, now I'm going to orbit around. So what I'm doing, I'm kind of organizing my job a little bit. So I'm going to do the same over here. So again, I'm just going to hit the shift key. So 2, 3, 4, 5. Right click, make group, right click again, hide. Very good. Okay, now we've got these pieces here. So I'm just going to hide, actually I don't need to hide that one. I'm going to hide the shelf. I'm going to hide the base. Then I'm going to make the drawer, again by marquee selection. Can you see that? I've missed a step. I've got to make that into a component. Now, how did I notice that? Notice how I clicked and dragged, and all of these just have the blue lines around it, but that's got the blue dots on it. Means I haven't made that into a component yet. That would be a disaster if I forgot to do that. Okay, triple left click, right click, make component, draw back. Okay. So now that I've made that into a component, I can now make this all into a group. It just makes it easier to manage. So I've selected all of those draw pieces, right click, make group. So now we've kind of organized our pieces a little bit better. I'm going to come in close here because what I'm going to show you how to do now is how to make a really simple mechanism for opening and closing this drawer. Now you can make a handle, but this is another way that you can do it. In fact, what we're going to do, we're basically going to cut out a semicircle out of here using the Forstner bit, which is what we would be doing in the workshop. And I'm just show you how you can do it in SketchUp. So I'll just click away. So first thing we do is, now we've made this into a group. So if we left click on there, you'll see that by one left click, it selects everything. So we've got to right click on that. We've got to edit the group. Then I can left click on that front component there, right click, edit component. So I've just got an extra layer to get access to these components. Okay, so we'll come in a little bit closer, orbit around just so I've got a reasonable front view, pan across. Okay, now just use the T for tape measure. What I want to do is I want to find the midpoint of the drawer here. So I'll just go out here, come along, and what you find is if I go sort of a bit slow, and even if I get up on this, there we go. This is what happens on anything. If you're sort of in around about the right spot, it will automatically find the midpoint for you. All right, so we'll make a line there. Now, because we're doing this in the real world, we've got to design it for the real world. So if we're going to use the Forstner bits to cut out our semicircle, they all come in specific dimensions. So in this case here, look, I've just made a decision. I'm going to use the 28mm size Forstner bit, but certainly when you're in the workshop, you might want to have a look yourself and see what you think would be good. Okay, so 28mm diameter. So I need my tape measure here, and I'm going to go 14mm out either side of this center mark. So I'm going to go 14mm, enter. Obviously 2 lots of 14 is 28. 14mm this way. Then I'm going to use my 2-point arc tool over here. Now if it's not there, you can use the drop down menu, and there it is. I'm going to click on that intersection there, click on that intersection there, and then come down the center here, and it'll pretty much click to a point there. I want to go down to half circle, where it says half circle, because that's pretty much what's going to happen in the real world. Then I left click again, P for push, and I just push that out. So there we go. We've now got a very nice mechanism for opening and closing the drawer. Quite simple too. So I'm just going to click away from that, delete guides. and then I'm going to unhide everything. So we've got everything back there. All right, just go to zoom extents here. So this looks pretty good, but remember before I was talking about not having the draw front flush here, and I actually allowed 5mm at the back there so that I could actually push this back in a little bit. So that's what I'm going to do now, and this is where making it into a group is making things a little bit easier. So I'm just going to select that, and it's actually, and I'll show you, it's selected the whole group of the draw. It hasn't just selected this front piece. So O for orbit, you can go around and see that the back is selected as well. So O for orbit, we've got a bit of a view there. I'm just going to pan up a little bit. M for move. So I'm just going to click anywhere on that group there. Make sure the line is green and just type the number 5. Now I'll just click away so nothing is selected. O for orbit. And you can see that it's flush at the back and it's sitting 5mm back in at the front. So it's looking pretty good. All right, let's just go out and have a good look at that. So we've made pretty good progress with this now. So in the next tutorial, I'm going to show you how to do a simple door design.